Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
So welcome to season 4, episode 4 of Inside the Rookery. I'm Lindsay Law, your host, and I am joined by my fellow Rooks, Andy Leask, writer and educator, and Mark Gibbons, illustrator and concept artist extraordinaire.
Ordinaire is fine.
Ultra-ordinary.
Ultra-ordinaire.
Ultra-ordinaire.
Oh, you see. That's why you're the big writer.
Pays the big bucks.
Yeah, I've scored out extra. I've added ultra. It's now canon from henceforward. And who's our guest tonight? Well, our guest tonight is Graham McNeill, award-winning and New York Times bestselling novelist of sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. You may know him from some of the tomes. The tombs. No, like where places where dead people live. The tomes behind me. And many, many more. Hi, Graham. Welcome to the stream.
Hi, Lindsay. Lovely to be here.
So we have got loads of questions that have been pre-submitted by patrons and people in our Discord community. And we've also, as always, got a lot of people in the chat, although we know a few of our viewers this week, I think, are at Dragon Meet. So we may have some people on the road who are watching us. If so, hi, everyone who's at Dragon Meet. So, Graham, do you want to introduce yourself or do you want me to dive straight into the questions?
I mean, I think you did a bang-up job there, getting me in the door. But yeah, my name is Graham McNeill. I've been a writer all my life, but people have given me money to do it for the last 20 or so years. Primarily, most of my work's been for the Black Library, but I've worked for a whole host of other people, Fantasy Flight Games. I did some work for Blizzard. Done some small press work, some original fiction, role-playing, comics, short stories, novels, video games, and let's say currently I work at Riot Games in Los Angeles, California.
Whew.
Welcome to the show. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump into the questions. We've got the first one from Zoltan, our golden rook, and he asks, do you have an idea of the end of a story when you start to write it, or do you let the writing process guide you and see where it leads you?
9 times out of 10, yes, I know the ending, because I think it's very hard to write a story without knowing the ending, without knowing, the North Star that you're heading for. It makes it very difficult to make any decisions as to the plot and the character, what they're going to do, without feeling like, okay, this is going to end up on the side of the Empire State Building with planes buzzing around my giant ape kind of storyline. It's hard to know where to take a story or where the characters should go or what decisions they should make without knowing that. So generally, yes. I mean, I know there are writers, like Stephen King famously did that with The Green Mile. He just started writing it and seeing where it took him and so on. But I'm very much in that sort of, the architect side of the sliding scale as opposed to the gardener, where I like to have a robust structure in place for the story. And certainly, if not the specifics of the ending, because that'll always change as stuff materializes along the way of the story, as characters surprise you and new and better ideas come along. But yeah, the shape or the idea of what the ending should be and how it should leave the reader by the end of it is generally always, if not set in stone, then pretty robustly ring-fenced. Yeah.
I mean,
Sorry, I was going to say, I don't know if it's just me, but maybe it's something, you've got an accent that's similar to one of my university lectures, because when you were talking there, I felt this compulsion to take notes.
Take notes?
Yes, great. Yeah, like, what? Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
The mentor in me coming out.
It was quite overwhelming. I literally started to write down your answer. And sorry.
My accent has gone through many iterations from, growing up and living in Glasgow all my life to then moving to Nottingham for 15 years and now being in Southern California for the last 7.5. So some of my rougher edges have maybe been smoothed off by the need to have Americans understand me.
Yeah, always a challenge. Well, it's it when I've met friends of yours from Glasgow, and because I always think of you as having a very strong Scottish accent, and then I meet friends of yours from Glasgow, and I realize, oh no, you don't at all.
No. I'm the posh boy, you see.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do have a very thespian Glaswegian accent. It's like you've been to the conservatoire.
What's the benefits of a private education?
Big hello to the World Anvil folks. Light up the forge. We've got a little stream invasion. So let's have a look. There's one that's come up. Rando is got one in the comments here. So Rando says, what did you learn from your worst writing experience and what from your best?
That's good, because a lot of times the biggest learning experiences come from when you fuck up or when things don't go right. Luckily, I've been very fortunate that most of the writing experiences I've had have been really good. I've worked with a lot of really good editors and collaborators along the way. Most times it's been, fine. Everything's worked out quite well. Disagreements and, head-butting sides aside, generally it's been pretty good. I think the trickiest one I had was probably writing The Crimson King. It was a follow-up to A Thousand Suns, one of my Horus Heresy novels. And that was a tricky one because it was written in a period when we were just about getting ready to move over to Los Angeles. So I had like a million things going on at the one time, trying to sort out visas, moving, a place to stay in America, sorting out dates for flights and so on. And because at the time when I was writing that, the early stages of it, there was quite a few other products that were in the pipeline from other writers that also used a number of the similar or same characters. And I think the best, most charitable way to describe it is there was a distinct lack of communication between the various collaborators, writers, editors on each of the different products. So I'd put my outline in and I was charging ahead with the writing of the story. And I was getting repeated emails, like a week here, a week there of, oh, no, you can't do that because in so-and-so's thing, we have this thing happen for the first time. So you can't mention him having done this, or they're doing this and they want that to be the reveal for their thing. Blah, 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 that sort of thing. And it meant I had to keep, reorientating where the story was going, what the characters were doing. I junked tens of thousands of words in the process of that book because what I felt was, a serious lack of communication as to who was doing what and air traffic control and the different products, to the point where when we moved to the States, just even looking at the book or opening the file became, almost breaking it in hives at the idea of getting onto this project. So eventually I did a similar project. It was like a novella that also had Magnus in it. There was like a prequel Magnus when he was on the Team Good Guy. It was a lovely sort of palate cleanser because the issues I've been having with the Crimson King, just they built up in my head to the point where it's like, well, I guess that's it. I guess the well has run dry. The time has come. The imposter police are getting ready to put at the door to come and march me out because that's it. They figured out you can't do this anymore. And it was horrible. It was really, really horrible. And when I did the Magnus novella, and it was so different because it was Magnus as a good guy, not as a fallen hero. It was a real palate cleanser. It really got me into the flow of the kind of tone and words of the story that just was inspiring, because having Magnus as a good guy was a joy to write, because normally he's a bit arrogant, he does bad things for good reasons, he thinks, and so on, but he was genuinely being good, and that really got me back into the zone of, I love writing this character, I love writing these settings, these words, these themes. And by the time I'd finished that novel, I was like, oh great, I've boarded at the door, the imposter police aren't getting in today, let's carry on, get on with this and get back to this other novel. So when I looked at it, enough time had passed that the annoyance at what had gone on to get me to this point was rear view mirror now. And I sort of changed my way of looking at the book, because I'd looked at it as like, okay, here's where we left off, let's get started going on from there. But I looked at it as if I sort of imagined a scenario that the previous author of these words had been killed in a hideous fishing accident, and they dropped this novel unfinished into my lap now to say, right, terrible, terrible tragedy with the previous author. He's not going to be able to finish it. We need you to finish it. So I, took it apart, rebroke it, and figured out what was working, what wasn't, and enough time had passed that I could be less precious about a lot of the stuff in the book, and just wrote it as if this was a fresh book given to me, and then I had to finish. And I think it weirdly, and you almost hate to admit it, but actually it probably made it a better book because I was able to channel a lot of that into some of the characters, and with some distance and perspective, some of the moments in the book that were early, that had gone in earlier, like, no, that needs to change, which I maybe wouldn't have had I just kept on going, as I had planned to be with the book. So that was a tough one. So that was not a fun book to write. As far as the easiest one, probably Sons of Illyrian, which was the second book in my High Elf duology. I mean, that one, that was many, many years had passed since the first book had come out, Defenders of Ulthuan, because I was in Warhammer was still the big boy in town, and I was working on a lot of those novels, and then the Heresy stomped into the room like the Kool-Aid man and was like, no, all Heresy all the time. So I was doing a lot of work for that, and every time I wanted to get back to finish the High Elf duology, some other new sweetness and shiny project would hove into view and say, no, do me instead. So eventually,
familiar refrain, I think, in your life.
Yeah. So that kept getting pushed down the pipeline. But then when I came back to do it, I eventually sort of put my foot down and said, no, I'm going to do this novel because I really want to finish it. And that whole novel poured out of me in, I would say, 7 or 8 weeks at most, just because I'd had those characters in my head for years, and I'd figured out what their story was, where it was going, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. And I've always found the high fantasy side of things really easy to write, in the sense of it's really quick. It's when I'm making it down in the gutter and dirty and grimy and filthy, that's when it's harder, because you want to there's a reality to that maybe you can skirt a little bit when you're in the high fantasy space, because
magic wavy
wizards
yes.
did it and so on. So that was, and I loved writing that book. I mean, I was writing it every day from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. give or take, and it was 7 days a week, and I loved it. I was loving the story, and I was gutted when it ended, actually, because I love these characters so much, but I'd taken them to places where there wasn't really room for them to go anywhere else. So that was probably the most fun I've had with the book, in terms of it being an easy ride.
I think it's interesting what you say about the worst experience, certainly creative experience generally. What I find that teaches you is discipline, professional discipline, because you have to, sooner or later, you have to just sort of gird the loins and get on and do it, because somebody's presumably paying you for it. So that's when the professionalism kicks in, sometimes reluctantly. But it can't all be fun. It can't all be just, hey, I'm just going to play goblins all day. I've got to do something I don't really want to do.
Absolutely. I mean, you get that. I mean, I fully allow this every time. I sort of budget that into my day or whatever. Whenever it's a novel is finished and you get the notes back or the critiques and stuff, I give myself time to, like, I'm going to shut the computer down, turn everything off, go outside and scream and shoot the heaven. These idiots not recognizing my genius, don't they know? And then walk away and for 20 minutes, then come back to the computer and open it up again and go, yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah. And then, roll up the sleeves and get on with the work to edit it and redo it, because, for novels, certainly it's more, you are the master of all you survey. All that is there is yours to command and control for a period, and then editors and the IP and the readers, everyone else gets a say in it. But for a while, you are the ego is rampant because everything is mine to change and know, sort of thing. But yeah, and especially nowadays, that as the projects I get and are involved with involve many, many, many more people, especially in video games, that level of collaboration and discipline and professionalism become ever more important, because you have to play nice with plenty of other people, because you cannot do everything.
No, you get branded difficult.
Exactly.
So I know from my own experience.
I can't imagine that's ever happened to you, Mark.
No, nor I.
I wear it as a badge of honor. I think as a concept artist, part of my job is to challenge the status quo. Push the boundaries.
Same with any creative, I think, has to walk a fine line of being able to have the ego to say, no, this idea or this story or this vision or idea in a piece of art is worth hanging on to. And your comment is, no, I need to push back on it. And it's a fine line between knowing where's pushing back enough and where's being just digging your heels in and being uncooperative. And it's a line that changes depending on the team and the people involved and the time of the week, sort of thing.
We've got a few questions in the chat. So here's one from Class Tillefson. Huge fan of your Warhammer 3940k stories. My question is, will we hear more from Nikona Sharokin?
Potential. Well, depends really. I mean, depends, Clays, whether you've read Sons of the Selenar or not, because Nikona Sharokin appears in that as effectively the last hurrah of the Sisypheum, the crew of that sort of splintered survivors of Istvan. And technically, yes, he's not dead at the end of that story. And if you know your 40k lore nuggets and so on, you'll be able to piece together, well, at some point that has to happen, and so has to go here. So yeah, maybe. I mean, he's the classic, well, we didn't see him die on screen, so maybe.
Yeah, what's a giveaway.
Yeah. And just leading on from your comment there about 40k and the interweaving lore. So the cartographer Elysium asks, do you find the existing canon and world building of 40k to be helpful or constraining, or both?
I think they're often the same thing. What seems like a constraint can often be an inspiration. Like, okay, well, we can't do that, so how would I still get to play this story beat or this emotional moment while still playing within the lines? I mean, the example I've used a lot is that scene in Apollo 13 when they're on the rocket up in space and the CO2 scrubbers are failing and they're all going to choke to death. So the engineer comes in and dumps a whole load of stuff on the table and says, this is what they have up in the rocket. You have to use these pieces to make this square hole fit in this round socket. Go. So I always look at that as part of the storyteller's job when you're working in a shared IP, is taking all the bits that have gone before and find ways to navigate that elegantly in a way that makes the reader, the viewer, the player feel like, well, of course that's how it is. That's how it was always going to be. It's, finding ways to use what is there to your advantage. And I often think that creatives, and speaking purely for myself, but from seeing other people, they often work best when there are some constraints in place, because it forces you to think, how can I be most creative while still playing within the lines in this IP? Because that's, that to me, that's a real show of how you can be creative when there are, okay, you can't use blue, or this character is dead. So how do you get that across without using those things? And it forces you to be more inventive. So I take inspiration from things I see, and I think that's cool. There's a story or some drama to be used out of this thing you've got here. Excellent. Or that piece there that's blocked off. It's like, okay, so I still want to get them to do this thing here, but I can't use that. So what could I use? And then bang, 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 5 new ideas come in. So
yeah, the first project that Graham and I worked on together was the Black Templars Codex for 40k, and there was a faction, a chapter that had the broad brushes, broad strokes painted with it. But how can we dial in on the archetype of this chapter and give it new depth and make it interesting and kind of inspiring to players who haven't considered picking up a Black Templar army before. So yeah.
I mean,
I'm annoyed about that, because that was supposed to be behind me, but I cannot for the life of me find it in the mess that is Andy's office
filing system.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a codex that I I get a lot of commentary about that, you know, through various social media or emails, what have you, that it was a codex, because we'd properly sort of got back into the mixing the grimdark and the madness into 40k that had maybe a few years prior to that had sort of drifted away. It became just like space soldiers without the craziness that had, you know, really defined what 40k was back in the, you know, the early Rogue Trader, Dark Millennium days and so on. So with things like Demon Hunters, Witch Hunters and so on, and the Black Templars, we really want to put some of that zealous madness back in. And, you know, with Mark's artwork for like Grimaldus and the Cenobite servitors and stuff, you know, really ramped that up. So it was like playing from what was there, but adding something new to it that still felt in character and completely thematic with what people expected of the Black Templars. So that's a good example of that.
I always think of 40k as like this massive, like high tragedy, Wagnerian, like space opera, where like the story of those Primarchs is just so tragic, like properly could be a Greek epic story, like 20 times. You know, there's so much there in terms of those characters.
It's ramped up to 11 of the Sturmendrang of the whole, you know, universe. I mean, it is literally Greek. I mean, it's, you know, the Horus Heresy is, you know, Paradise Lost, essentially. You know, the fall from heaven. Every one of the Primarchs is that very definition of a Shakespearean tragic hero. They've got the, you know, lots of skills, but one blind spot that they are utterly immune to knowing that is there, and that will become their downfall.
Let's go back to some that were submitted previously. So Lazy Cat asks, do you ever get writer's block? What do you do to cure it or avoid it in the first place?
It's one of these things. I think I always think writer's block is a bit of a misnomer. I always think it's not a writer's block. It's lack of kind of preparation. You know, when if there's a problem with how the story goes forward, it's because you've not paid attention earlier on to how things are set up, or like we talked about earlier on, like, you know, knowing your ending. You know, because when you know your ending, oftentimes you can just simply just work back. Okay, I want everybody on top of the nuclear reactor. Okay, how do I get them there? Well, these guys have to come in from here. These guys have to come in from there. Okay, so how did they get there? So it's, again, having a robust structure and outline in place for me certainly is essential. You know, again, you'll find I'll repeat myself a lot here and a lot of these things, because I think they're so important in terms of what I do. Having, you know, a structure that is strong enough to support the story, it makes sense that the characters, that they are the ones making the decisions that will inform that structure, but also one that has enough flex in it so that when those new ideas and cooler thoughts, or, oh, that'd be nice, actually, or, you know, you write, like let's say in the Ambassador book I see behind you there, Lindsay, there's a moment that happens in there where I mistyped which character said a line. And suddenly I was like, if that's actually the thing that he said, that means he knew that thing, and that blows that whole storyline completely way open. So the whole back third of the first novel took a screeching left turn in a way that surprised me. And I was like, if it surprised me and I'm writing the bloody thing, hopefully the readers will be equally wrong-footed as well. But it felt earned. It felt like, you know, you weren't just like, and then aliens turned up. I'm like, what? It felt like, you know, this was always been there and we just didn't see it, kind of thing. So for writer's block, it's not something I've, you know, I've procrastinated lots. I have avoided coming to the keyboard plenty of times, but that's for whole different reasons, as opposed to I don't know where the story is going. Because I always, when I finish the day before, I borrow that sort of that Hemingway technique of, I'll finish mid-sentence sometimes, like, nope, it's 6 o'clock or whatever time I've decided I'm going to finish it that night. And if I'm being mid-sentence, 3 words away from the end of the paragraph, I was like, right, no, I'm done. See ya. So that when I come back the next day, I can just zoom straight back in again.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah. I guess it's like it's sort of a little bit of the fear of the blank page. What I tend to do is I've usually got half a dozen projects on the go. So if I hit a bit of a stumbling block with something, there's always something else at a different stage of development. It might be a thumbnail sketch. It might be, I've nearly finished this illustration. So I can always go, I'll just jump on this for a while, and then my subconscious or my some other part of my brain will go, oh, I've been thinking about that thing you asked me to think about last week.
It can percolate in the back of your head if need be. Yeah, and that's one thing. Like when we're talking about the tyranny of the blank page, is I make a point never to come to a blank page.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm coming at this new day of writing. All right, there's where I left off. Okay, I'll reread the previous paragraph to sort of get into the flow and then jump back in. Or if I do get to a point where, like, okay, I finished this chapter, this section, whatever, I'll before I finish for the night, I'll just type 4 or 5 lines, whatever, of, okay, so tomorrow it's the scene where the knight goes here, the dragon does this, and they go into this bit. So again, I'm not coming to a blank page. I'm not coming to, your time at the keyboard when you're writing is, it's precious. As more and more things have to, take their toll in the time you have at the keyboard, I'm like, okay, I can't afford to sit there for the next hour going, what am I doing today?
Right.
Thing. How's this scene going to go? It's like, no, I've sorted that out, even just in note form the night before. And, your subconscious is it's always ticking away at the background as to what you might be doing. So, or, the line of dialogue will lodge in your head, or, oh, that'd be kind of cool. Must remember to mention the sword has this thing on it, or whatever it is. So when you get in there the next morning, next afternoon, whatever your schedule is, it's easy to slot back in and just get into that flow state, because that's when it's, I know for myself, and I can only assume it's the same for other musicians, artists, whatever, that when you've ramped up to the flow state and everything's just clicking and coming onto the page, the lines are looking right, the colors are good, the tune is right, the words they're exactly what you want them to be. The quicker you can get to that, the better. And then by the it's an easy state to get broken out of. That have you just got 5 minutes?
Yeah.
And
so,
in my
walk, not so much, but in a worst case scenario, I'll just get out and go for a walk, take the dogs out or something.
Yeah, that is part of my daily process. I tend to start the day with getting out and getting in the fresh air, and then that part of my brain that knows that, oh, we're outside. Okay, well, I'll that thing you asked me to think about the other day.
Yeah.
I've now got a solution for that, and I find that if I don't do that, my whole day feels really sluggish.
Yeah,
I'm dragging myself to the desk. But if I've been out and done the fresh air bit.
Graham used the word percolate, and that's how I think of that bit of my brain. I'll be like, I know I'm not going to think about it consciously, but I know my brain will be thinking about it, and I use that creatively, but also like in my day job, which is a judgmental job, so it's not creative, but it's thinking about evidence and coming to a conclusion. And I often say to my team, they'll be like, Lindsay, like, what's the answer? And I'll be like, I'm just going to let that percolate. I'm going to let it sit over the weekend.
Yep.
And I don't think about it all weekend. But on the Monday, I'll be like, yeah, no, I feel better about that. I've come to a conclusion. So it's interesting to hear you use the same word for dripping coffee, because it's exactly the word that I use for that.
Coffee is our fuel, right? Yeah, I've been a big advocate of the whole let things simmer for a while. Whether it's just like, Gav uses that term, couch time. It's like when you're sat on the couch apparently doing nothing, and you're like, well, I'm working. I'm just letting the ideas bubble away in the background, and just think, oh, how would that work if this happened? And if they went there, what would that do? And it's, it's part of that, just allowing the bad ideas to work in the background in your head, because you have to go down sometimes a lot of bad alleys to see, no, that's not going to work. Oh, this one here, no, that's not going to work. And you go down a lot of these bad routes to find that's the one that does. And, over the years, I've gotten, I hope, better at figuring out, okay, here's the thing, what about that? And then just going, no, that wouldn't work because of, and without having to write it on the page and find out it didn't work. I've done this often enough that I can usually, not always, can usually figure out whether that's an alley, or an avenue worth pursuing before spending hours writing and going, bugger, that doesn't work. Jumped 1,000 words. There's a day gone.
As you mentioned the Ambassador Chronicles, I'll bring this up because it's a very specific question from Lazy Cat. Was there a person who was the inspiration behind General Caspar von Velten in the Ambassador Chronicles? He's a favourite NPC in our Wifrip campaign.
Okay. There's a couple of answers to that one. I saw the cover for the first for the Ambassador, not the Ambassador Chronicles. I saw the cover for the first novel that Paul Dainton had done. And looking at, because I described, I talked through with Paul, like who the character was, what his thing was, and when I saw the cover for it, I was like, "Oh, cool! That's Hunt for Red October era Sean Connery." Here we go. There's my in. That's my gateway into the character in terms of his mannerisms, his gruffness, and so on. So that was an easy one for that one. And as far as an inspiration behind him, there's a couple of threads to that one. One was, like early on in my sort of days with Black Library, when the catalogue of books was much reduced compared to what it is now. What I often did before starting anything was a sort of what would you call a State of the Union, so to speak. I would look at the domain of all the books and see, okay, what have we got tons of? What have we got not a lot of? And where are the gaps? What haven't we seen? What settings haven't we explored hugely? What character archetypes haven't we seen or we've seen too much of, or what have you? So the idea of Kislev, we haven't seen. Bill King did Beast Slayer set up in Kislev, but that was about it really, And we'd had something rotten in Kislev, Wifrip campaign book. But that was it, really. So I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. I can get to explore somewhere new and add things to it and take my spin onto that setting. And again, for the character, characters are as much part of that, state of the nation as anything else. Okay, we've seen too many, gigantic, knights on horseback. We've seen a lot of, grizzled bounty hunters or whatever the thing was. So I was like, oh, well, all the characters tend to be young. So, okay, let's do a guy older at the end of his career, one who's essentially been put out to pasture. Let's do a guy who is not a fighter anymore. I mean, he can hold a sword and, not be embarrassed by it or know which end to hold, but he's not a frontline ranker who's going to smash through people with two-handed swords or a blade master sort of thing. He's a general. He's used to leading from the back of a horse at the back of a battle line sort of thing. So that was kind of the where he came from and the setting came from. And, that was maybe my second or third book that I'd written. So, I drew from a lot of myself in him because he's a grumpy old bastard who doesn't want to be feeling, that this is is this the end of his career sort of thing. So there was a lot of personal reflections from his point of view about the folly of youth and the age and wisdom and so on. So yeah, I'm
with Lazy Cat. I love him, by the way. Yeah. I just think he's such a brilliant character. He's one of my favorites.
He was a fun guy to write, and his ending, because originally, again, not to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it, but his ending was supposed to be that he got to live, but he didn't, unfortunately.
No spoilers, but
I know. But he was going to live at the end of that book, but and this is like a window into the psychology 101 of Graham McNeill of that period. But I went through a terrible breakup at that point, and it's like, no, he's dead and darkness and doom, and nobody gets to live and be happy. So that's why we never got any more Ambassador books after the second.
Wow, wow.
I'm gutted. I wish he had lived. But I think, the funny thing about Wifrip?
So some of the characters do. I mean, there's with the End Times, when that came around, a bunch of the characters from the Ambassador books reappear in the story that I did for that. A Song of Ice and not a Song of Ice and Fire. That's a very different story. I can't remember, what was it called again? Oh, by Ice and Sword. That's what it's called. The riff on that, the Slavic story about the Cossacks and so on. But yeah, the Ice Queen and the Kurt Bremen the Knight and a few of the other characters from the Ambassador books arrive in that one, because I love that setting and character so much.
The thing about Wifrip as well is that when you're writing the novels for it, you know that there are people in gaming groups across the country, nay the world, who are making him live. And
good. Well,
I get some comfort from that.
The spirit of Caspar lives on, for sure.
Yeah. So a very quick one, a short question. I mean, you don't need to be quick in your answer. Infinite Saxon asked, in your novels, have you had a favorite character to write? So I thought that would be a good follow-up to that one.
Yeah. Again, usually it's always the one I'm writing right now, because I'm so invested in who they are and what they're doing and what their arc is going to be and so on. But of the ones I've come back to, I mean, Uriel Ventris, I love writing him because, I love like the works of Gemmell and so on. They're all heroic fantasy, that I love. As grimdark as the 40k universe is, I love that there are some people who embody the heroic part of that. And, yes, they are part of this gigantic galaxy spanning totalitarian regime and so on. But they are, hopefully a good, spark of light within that. And watching somebody who's within the system, essentially trying to do the right thing, even though the system around them is not doing that on a daily basis, is fun to write. Because that's the part that appeals to me, is stories where the heroes triumph. But like that would be a very boring diet if that was all you had. So the villains are fun as well, and probably Lucius the Eternal of the Emperor's Children and Honsu from the Iron Warriors are probably my two favorite guys to write, because they get to do anything they want. They can be as horrible as they want. They can get to say things that Uriel would never say and could never say. They get to act out of pure self-interest and arrogance and conceit that, again, the more heroic characters can't get to say those things. It was one of the things I loved about the TV version of Spartacus. The dialogue in that was like Shakespearean, rich with things that you think those actors must have had the best days of their lives get to say those things. John Hannah must have had a ball getting to say Batiatus's lines. So
I was saying Jupiter's cock an awful lot after Spartacus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Constantly.
When Anita was in town with one of her pals and they saw John Hannah in Santa Monica, and I was like, please tell me you ran up to him and shouted, "By Jupiter's cock!" And they didn't. And I was like, well, what are we even doing in California?
Yeah, really.
What's the point?
Why did you come out here?
What are you doing in your life anymore? Really?
Gerard Butler's from Glasgow, right? And I've heard that his pals back in Glasgow call him Jerry Sparta.
That makes sense. This
Yep.
is Pollock.
Jerry Sparta.
That's a good one. I like that one.
Anyway.
But the villains, traditionally, it's the villains get all the best lines. They get all the fun chewing up the scenery. But I try and make sure that my heroic characters get, their moment to do something, that gets you sort of jumping out of the chair going, "Fuck yes, well done, lad. That's a good one." But the villains tend to walk away with most of the scenery chewing.
So you mentioned Gemmell, and I think there was a question in the chat about Secondhand Samurai. Says, when you won the David Gemmell Legend Award, did you get to carry Snaga to work for a bit, or will you be going after
it's
more?
Back there. It's back there on the wall.
Armament
because I'm reversed in the camera today, so I'm like, I'm pointing there, and it's the other way around. Yes, there's Snaga right behind me.
I think someone did mention that earlier.
A smaller version, but it was myself and Nick Kime went down to the Magic Circle headquarters in London, which is where they held the award in 2010. And yeah, when they like, and the winner is Graham McNeill, and they were like, "Oh yeah, And at the the sort of the reception room down below where all the drinks and stuff were, the snagger, the real thing is bloody enormous. It's really, really heavy, and I'm like, man, my respect for Druss has even more if this is the thing you were swinging around in it. And yeah, unfortunately, they did make me give that one back. That isn't the one they let you keep. But yes, there we go. There we go. One axe over my shoulder, which Mr. Gibbons got framed for me down his neck of the woods.
Oh yeah.
Oh, did you? Oh,
yeah, I did.
Right. So, Andy asks, I wonder which Andy that could be. You talked earlier, you touched upon it a little bit about the fearlessness of youth and the process of growing old. And before we came on the screen, we were actually talking about that creative fearlessness. And Andy, as an English teacher, knows a lot about that time in which kids go from being able to write anything and just pouring it all down on the page to being really quite self-conscious. So I suppose the question is, how do you recapture the creative fearlessness of youth, or have you ever done it?
I mean, you tell yourself you haven't. I don't know. I think it's the way I look at it is like people pay me to write stories about wizards, goblins, and dragons and toy soldiers. So there's a limit to how old creatively you can feel when you get to do that for a living. I don't know. I think just remembering what excites you about the IP. You may have been involved in it. I mean, I've been involved professionally with the Games Workshop for the IP for the last 22 years. I still love it. I've been into it since I was, 14 or so, which, was, despite all the outward appearances, was not yesterday. It was some time ago that I first got into this. And I still absolutely uncritically...
Yeah. All the painted miniatures on the shelves behind you, a clear indicator of that.
The Nurgle, the Empire, Death Guard, the Necrons. Yeah, I mean, I still love it. I paint the models. I read the books. I really enjoy it. And I think, to me, the secret, it's not even a secret. It's just enjoy the things you do and don't be afraid to take big swings in terms of plot or characters or, what you want to do with an IP, and, find people to work with who inspire you, who make you be better. I mean, not to gush too much, but like I say, one of the most fulfilling creative things we did at Workshop was the Black Tempest Codex. I absolutely loved working with Mark, just because we would riff off each other's ideas. We would talk through
in the pub, almost always in the pub.
Always. I mean, there was a certain lubricant that helped
yes.
the creative flow. But no, I mean, when you work with people whose work you respect and love and admire, it forces you to be better. Because, like, when we were working in the Horus Heresy novels, and we would get together, like 4 times a year, give or take, to have a planning session for what the next bunch of novels and characters were going to be, what moments in the heresy we had to hit on, what we'd like to do, and so on. And there was a real palpable sensation of that nobody wanted to be the first person to drop the ball, because all the heresy novels, up till certain points and what have you, had all been received really well. People had, really liked them. So nobody wanted to write the first one that would be like everybody hated, or that sucks, and so on. So, when you were sharing a writer's room with, Dan and Jim and Aaron and Gav and Chris and Nick and all the others, it's a murderer's row of talented people, and they made me want to be better. They made me dig deep into that well to go, okay, what can I do that is going to tell a great story that I want to tell, but is going to reflect the work they've done and make them think next time they've got to do one after following one of mine, they're like, oh shit, man, Graham just knocked out of the park on that one. What am I going to do? So it's just surround yourself with people who are really cool and good at what they do, and that just makes you want to be better. And just not being afraid to take, chances on a story. I think, okay, like I say, we talked earlier about going down some blind alleys that make, to discover what works and what doesn't. And having, a caveat that again, because any sort of advice sort of thing on writing is literally there to be blown out the water by the next comment and saying, oh, actually that did work. Sometimes there are plot points or character moments where you just go, okay, let's follow this, just let it suck for a while and see where it leads, because it might not be something we're going to take that thread and use it, but something might come out of it. Oh, now that's an interesting nugget that can come into it. So just love what you do, work with creative people, and literally, almost tell yourself to, okay, don't be staid, don't be boring, be creatively fearless. It's like almost fake it till you make it sort of thing. Tell yourself that you're to do that, and you will become it. And you will become confident.
My fearlessness has shifted over the years. I think when I think back to my 20s, when I was first working as an illustrator for Games Workshop, I felt I was pretty fearless with the art. And I think I look at it now and I see all the mistakes, I see the naivety, but it didn't seem to bother me back then. I was nervous about doing concept stuff because I didn't think I had enough in my tank, to come up with interesting, cool ideas. These days, I feel confident in my concept, but really, really shaky on my illustration abilities. Because I know now what proper anatomy looks like, and I beat myself up when I get it wrong. Now, when I never used to, it's sort of flipped it on its head a bit.
Yeah, because I think I've come from the almost the opposite direction to the same place of like nowadays I feel confident in my ability to execute a thing, whereas now it's like, okay, has this been done 1,000 times? Because the catalog of all the various IPs that I've worked in have expanded so much now that you can't read it all, you can't be aware of every single thing in it, and you're like, oh, so it's now is what I'm doing worth doing? I know I can do it once I've got it, but is what I'm thinking of doing for story, is that worth it? Whereas again, I look back at some of my early stuff and I see all the mistakes that early authors in their career make, the naivety, I think the clumsiness in some ways of exposition and stuff like that. But at the same time, I think that's good sometimes. I think it's good anyway, because I look back and go, okay, I see how I have grown at that point. I can see what I did and what I do now, and seeing that I think I've got better.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go in, man.
You never want to look back at something you did 20 years ago and think that's the best thing I've ever done.
For example, Nightbringer, the first novel I ever wrote, at one point Black Library, they were going to release I forget what the name of the edition, like the Masterworks edition or BL Classics or something like that. And the editors offered me the chance to go back in and say, here's the manuscript as was published. Do you want to go through it again and re-edit it, rewrite bits of it, and do anything to undo those mistakes and follies of youth, sort of thing? And my initial reaction was, oh yeah, that'd be kind of cool, yeah, that'd be great. But then again, to bring it back to Gemmell, I remember somebody talking to him about Legend, his first novel, and they were saying, he was saying in an interview, like, yeah, I'm a loads better writer, storyteller, character person than I was back then. But, could I go back to Legend and improve it? Technically, absolutely. Yeah, for sure I could. But I don't know that I would ever be able to improve the heart of that novel, the thing that makes Legend. I don't know that I could ever improve that, because that heart, that essence is always there. And I had the same feeling of Nightbringer. Like, I almost don't want it to change, because it's a time capsule of who I was as a human and as a writer at that time. I was like, no, I don't want different versions of it. You haven't got the more recent one. Oh, well, that's just not the proper version. This is the proper version. So I was like, no, actually, I'm not gonna do that.
That's fascinating.
I'd like to leave it as it was.
Because as you were talking there, I was thinking about people who and creators who do go back, and I was just thinking, like, what's the difference? You get, like, musicians go back and re-record their back catalogue, and remaster it, and film directors go back and recut. But it just hit me that actually that's often about technology. The technology has improved in those fields, and though they feel like they can go back and add something that they were constrained by, whereas in literature you don't see that, because it's still just words, right? You might have changed,
you don't see
but
the construction line. It's like like George Lucas wanting to go back and change the line.
Yeah, it's just what I was going to say. Don't do, George, no.
I mean, there's
you shouldn't have done that, man.
Like when the VFX for the Battle of Hoth, and it was more the effects artists were haunted, by, you could see the lines in the cockpit and so on. And again, like you say, I think you're exactly right, Lindsay, that it's technical aspects, fine, change, but storytelling ones, no, there's no need for any of that. The inclusion of Boba Fett as a human, then grafted on with the slug at the end of it, was awful. That should never have been back in it. So, sorry, Andy, I stepped in your point. Yeah.
All I was going to say is that, like, I think when authors do go back and kind of revisit, it's often like quite a pernicious thing. So, like, alongside when Lucas was redoing Star Wars, like Steven Spielberg did some little tweaks to E.T.
Oh God, he took the guns out.
He took the guns out. And, and I understand, like, morally, I understand he's wanting to, kind of downplay gun violence and stuff. And I'm all on board with that. But actually taking the guns out of the hands of the agents who were supposed to be the bad guys that were frightening, like, seems to misunderstand the point of what they're doing. Yeah. Or like, to get all literary, like Wordsworth did that with the Prelude, which was his big epic poem. Like he published 3 different versions of that through his lifetime. And the first one was when he was a young man, and it was at the time of the French Revolution, and he was pro-revolution, and he was this radical thinker, and this poem was all, in favor of that. And then the French Revolution became the Terror, and he went, I'd better tone that down a little bit. So he redid it, and it wasn't quite so in favor of revolution. And then he became this establishment figure, the poet laureate, this kind of wealthy old man. And he's like, all of those ideas aren't good. And he wrote it again to be really conservative. And,
like fucking Ben Elton.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think there's a real moral risk.
Politics.
Yeah.
Although Ben Elton has redeemed himself with the Upstart Crow, I will say that.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
There's a lot of feeling in the chat about Star Wars being changed.
Oh, let's not talk about Han shooting.
And open worms everywhere.
And let's be clear, Han didn't shoot first. Han is the only one who shot.
He's the only one who shoots. Kills Greedo.
I was going to say, for an author, there is a different way to go back and revisit your work. And I'm thinking, of course, of the great 21st century novels, the Twilight series, in which I think she went back and like did it from a different perspective, so like looking at the same events, but from someone else's point of view. I think that could be quite interesting, albeit probably not. And
sparkly vampires.
I think there's definite room for, like, say I went back and did a sort of a companion novel or novella from, went alongside Nightbringer that was from the point of view of the Inquisitor character, say, because there's loads of moments in the story where he's not there, going off doing his inquisitorial stuff, and then comes back into the story. So, companion pieces, absolutely, I can see, a good argument for why you might want to tell, like we're seeing things like Andor, for example, going alongside, or slightly before, it's the prequel to the prequel sort of thing. We're seeing things that go alongside the main storyline, which are, adding huge amounts of nuance and character to the existing canon and storyline. So those sort of things, absolutely. But going back to redo a novel of its day, no, that doesn't really interest me. I'd rather creatively move forward all the time rather than going back.
Andor is brilliant because because you know what's to come, it's even more poignant and really all quite hard to watch, because they're like, he is so likable in a way. Actually, I was saying in another stream that I hadn't actually seen Rogue One, because Andy tried to get me to watch it once, but for some reason I fell asleep, so I sort of watched it, so I hadn't actually seen it till like a couple of weeks
and they all live happily ever after.
Yeah And I'd watched quite a lot of Andor, then watched Rogue One, and then I knew what happened in Rogue One because I sort of dream watched it, but I just think they've done an amazing job and really like
I-
pulling
yeah,
on
I-
your heartstrings.
Yeah, I finished Andor, and then I went and watched Rogue One just the other day, and I was at the end of it going. I was watching it, knowing the way that these mega corporate entertainment corporations work. I was watching. Is there a way at the end that he doesn't die at the end of it? And I'm watching, going like, no, he's gone. No.
You're consumed by nuclear fire. No, you're not.
Yeah. I don't think they're pulling him out of that.
The interesting thing with that is when they originally wrote Rogue One, like the writers assumed that they would have to make them survive and didn't kill them off. And then Disney were like, no, you can totally kill them off. And they're like, oh, okay.
That's when you get people like with that, with Tony Gilroy and Bo Willimon writing and directing, you know you're in for a good ride.
Oh, yeah, he's incredible, Tony Gilroy.
Tony Gilroy is just like,
Right. What have we? We've got one about sort of a double-barreled one. We don't have that much time left, but it'll be fine. Infinite Saxon asks, how do you approach conflicting sources when it comes to writing about areas or eras with conflicting lore, such as the time of Sigmar? And how do you decide what material to base your work off? I'm a big fan of the Sigmar books, by the way. Thank you, Infinite Saxon.
Generally, I mean, we haven't really. There's a few, not even contradictions, but a few sort of moments that could be this or could be that in the Sigmar book. I mean, most of the stuff that I used as my jumping off point for that was Matt Ralph's, I forget the name, it's the little, like a little artifact book, The Life and Times of Sigmar, that was
I've got a copy over there.
like an artifact book of a book that you might find in a library in the Empire somewhere. And that was all crouched as, sort of woodcuts that were stories of the time presented from as this lost manuscript that had sort of fallen behind the sofa in, the great library of Altdorf sort of thing. So that was a big jumping off point. And Gav had done a story, Birth of a Legend, that was about how Sigmar had come to rescue the dwarves who eventually gifted him his Gal Maraz. So the way I looked at it is like, these are not unreliable narrators necessarily, but they are historical documents, and they are potentially full of mistakes. They're potentially could have been written hundreds of years after the event. Most of the things that we have, unless they're like primary sources written by people at the time, are written many, many years after the event by people who weren't actually at these, giant historical moments in time. So I always looked at that as, this is what the legend tells us. The truth may be something different, because when you're writing the novel from the point of view of the characters in those moments, that's the truth, quote unquote, because you're telling it, you have to tell it as if that is all true. This is how it happened. So at any point where there were significant deviations, and I honestly don't remember too many of them. I mean, it was mostly sort of timeline questions about when a thing happened, rather than he killed this guy there, or he spared him in that one sort of thing. And it's like, there weren't really too many like that. But we ran into some of that with the Heresy as well, with some older books had moments where you're like, well, that doesn't really work with where the lore has got to and come to over the years, or what we want to do with the storyline. But you would always try and incorporate it in a way. If you couldn't, then you would, the most basic way of doing it is like, well, some say it was this, but we think it is different. Evidence points to this, and so on. Or again, when you get to the point, if none of those work, it's just like, okay, you just have to kind of lean into the thing we are doing to change it and just commit to that. But any kind of retcon, if that's what it is got to be weighed with the potential for what good it brings you in the story and the IP, and what damage it might do in terms of the trust of the readers, the viewers, the players, and so on. Because that's a very fragile, delicate thing. And when your players trust that you curate and care for and love the IP as much as they do, they will lean into your story. They will immerse themselves more, as to if they feel that you're just breaking it for the sake of your story and not caring about the canon or whatever it is, then they kind of pull away from the story. And that's the last thing you want from any creative endeavor, that people pull away from it or feel like, I could just put this down, or I'm not feeling this because I don't think this guy really gets it. He's not a fan like us, or what have you. So you know, everything I've written for, I'm a fan of, and I want that to bleed onto the page. And if there's contradictions in what has been said over the 30 years or more of these storytelling, which is always going to happen. I mean, it's things that were cool 30 years ago might be a little bit, let's maybe not bring that back into the storyline now. But yeah, I try and be sympathetic to any moments where there's contradiction, but ultimately the coolness of the story you are telling within the grander place within the IP is what matters the most. What's going to do the most good for the story and the characters and the readers and so on at the end of the day.
Thank you. On that's 8 o'clock. We've reached the end of our stream. Yeah.
Excellent.
So thank you so much for joining us, Graham. It was a real pleasure
No
to
problem at
talk
all.
to you.
We can.
I feel we've only scratched the surface.
I was going to say, if there's more questions, we can figure out some sort of follow-up, whether chatting or a post or something. But yeah, I'd love to chat again. I've really enjoyed this.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So next week, in the week on Wednesday, we'll be talking to author Ben Aronovich and line editor Lynn Hardy about the new Rivers of London RPG. So please do join us for that. We're really excited about it. And until then, please like and subscribe on YouTube if you're watching us afterwards on there. And until then, thank you so much to all our patrons, our Discord community, my fellow Rooks, Andy and Mark, and of course, a very special thank you to you, Graham. And all that remains for me to say this evening is enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and goodbye, and caw-caw!
Ta-ra!